Yaoyao is one of the few 4-star characters in recent memory that stand out to me. With the opportunity to pull Yaoyao on the upcoming 4.4 rerun banners or choosing her for your free 4-star if you haven't finished this year's Lantern Rite event, now's the perfect time to revisit her. Not only does she have more build options now compared to the past, but she also is useful for almost every account, which is not necessarily a trend we've seen often with new 4-star characters. This is thanks to two different upsides that she has. The first of which is what many like to call role consolidation. Having a character fulfill two of your needs at once is always a sign of a good character in Genshin, with high usage options like Bennett healing and buffing your character, or Kuki Shinobu healing and dealing Hyperbloom damage as some good examples of role consolidators. Yaoyao's elemental skill places her rabbit down on the field to throw radishes that can heal the active character and damage enemies upon impact in a small AoE. Her burst will upgrade her healing to the entire party and spawn even more rabbits to attack enemies, and also allow Yaoyao herself to spawn radishes by jumping around or sprinting around. The combination of the stellar healing and dendro application both off-field with her skill and on-field with her burst creates that role consolidation that we all know and love. Dendro application is so important in teams that depend on creating bloom cores, and Yaoyao is not a bad option, especially in multi-target situations, given that her skill can randomly target different enemies for more dendro application compared to single target. One tip to increase her dendro application slightly is to make sure to use Yaoyao's burst while her skill is not active. For my knowledgeable Genshin players out there, the reason why is because the two abilities have the same internal cooldown, which is basically the game mechanic that determines how fast a character can apply their respective element to a specific enemy, and splitting them up allows Yaoyao to spread out her hits to account for this hidden cooldown. With her artifact options, she can also debuff enemies or buff allies, which adds another layer of utility to role consolidation to go along with dendro application and healing, but that's a discussion for a few more minutes down the line. Before we get to that point, the second reason why Yaoyao is still a standout 4-star character a year later is because of her constellations, or rather the lack of reliance on her constellations. Nowadays, Genshin has quite a few specialized 4-stars who get major support power spikes at C6 like Farazan, or get major DPS spikes at C6 like Gaming. If you take a look at Yaoyao, you'll find that she gets niche upgrades, but there isn't a huge universal power spike holding her back compared to her C0 baseline, but that isn't to say that her constellations are bad. Her C1 is great for that buffing utility we talked about with the role consolidation, but only benefits you if you have a dendro DPS to pair with it. Her C2 isn't necessary, but there's no doubt that this is her most universal constellation, and the energy makes building her easier. The flat energy regen from this constellation can reduce your energy requirements by up to 30% compared to the recommended C0 benchmarks that I'll mention in the artifact section. Meanwhile, her C4 adds some elemental mastery to her build that really only finds use in Nilou Bloom teams. As it should be, C6 is Yaoyao's most notable power spike constellation simply because the extra mega radish that it allows her rabbits to throw does equate to more dendro application per rotation. However, the point I'm trying to make here is that the discrepancy between C0 Yaoyao and C6 Yaoyao isn't as large when compared to other 4-stars. Being a healer means that with the right build, Yaoyao can fit into any account without having to worry about which constellations you need to get for that massive DPS increase that other offensive 4-star characters usually have to worry about. To find that perfect build, let's start off with her artifacts. As a general preface, what team you decide to play Yaoyao in will determine her best artifact setup. For any team that utilizes Bloom, Hyperbloom, Burgeon, or raw dendro DPS, you want to run the 4-set Deepwood Memories. Yaoyao is a surprisingly good applicator of the dendro res shred from this set with her burst and random enemy targeting with her skill, so unless you have a double dendro setup with someone like Nahida who already holds the 4-set Deepwood, then it is always recommended to default to this set. In the case where you don't need the 4-set Deepwood, such as in an Aggravate team where Yaoyao is the only dendro character on the team, you can choose to run either the 4-set Tenacity of the Millelith or the 4-set Song of Days Past. Most characters can benefit from attack percent, so usually the 4-set Tenacity is the most consistent option. Song of Days Past is generally not recommended because it has finicky uptime and cannot be used with range characters like a Kokomi for example, because only melee characters can be in range of a Radish's AoE explosion and get healed when Yuegui targets enemies instead of allies. And if the active character isn't hit by their explosion, there will be no healing, so there will be no buff from Song of Days Past. The 4-set Instructor is a cheap 4-star option that serves as both a great beginner option before breaking into 5-star artifact farming, and a niche option for late game hyper investment teams like Nilou Bloom, where EM benefits the entire team. Just keep in mind that 4-star artifacts have significantly lower stats compared to 5-star pieces, so don't be compelled to switch unless you're confident that Yaoyao's healing isn't something that your account needs. As for artifact stats, take the usual ER Sands, HP Goblet, and Healing Bonus Circlet. Substats include Energy Recharge, HP, EM for Nilou Bloom teams, and crit rate whenever Yaoyao is running Favonius Lance for her weapon. The only concern with stat requirements is that without C2, your energy benchmarks are a big focus. As a solo Dendro character without C2, you'll want to aim for 220% energy recharge to burst every rotation, but this number can go down if you decide to burst every other rotation, or have other ways to generate energy like weapon passives or other Dendro teammates. With C2, you can even dip slightly below 200% energy recharge, which is a nice way to allocate stats into HP for better healing. If you're curious about those weapons that help alleviate Yaoyao's energy woes, we have a few options to choose from. Favonius Lance is typically regarded as the best option for Yaoyao, considering it helps not only her own energy requirements but also her teammates' requirements as well. However, if this polearm is occupied by another character on your account, or you simply don't want to focus building crit rate for Yaoyao, Fontaine introduced a fantastic polearm for her. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Rightful Reward as the very first 4-star polearm with an HP main stat. Not only that, but the polearm is completely free to play as a craftable option, and the passive perfectly fits Yaoyao since she can heal herself to activate the energy restoration passive. This weapon now outclasses the old Inazuma craftable Katane Cross Spear unless you're running Yaoyao in a Nilou Bloom team, since the EM stat on Katane is non-negligible and the passive still has energy generation. And for my super cheap players out there, yes, Black Tassel is a 3-star polearm that is still viable because it provides a hefty HP stat, but without an energy passive, it is simply now outclassed by Rightful Reward, so go do your weeklies for billets and dream solvents. Now that you're equipped with the best Yaoyao build for your account, it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of teams. Hyperbloom is probably the most popular and consistent team archetype out there in general, so let's get this one out of the way first. The core of the team consists of Yaoyao, a Hydro Applicator, and your Hyperbloom trigger. Hydro Applicators include Xingqiu, Yilan, Ayato, and Neuvillette as the best options, with Kokomi, Barbara, Child, and Furina as some nice replacement options. Everyone knows that Xingqiu and Yilan are fantastic off-field Hydro characters, but I quickly want to speak about Ayato and Neuvillette. Both are on-field Hydro Applicators that synergize quite well with Yaoyao because their quick rotations allow for Yaoyao to easily burst for Dendro application without cutting into the valuable DPS time or extending rotations for more than just a few seconds. Ayato is more so synergistic with Yaoyao because his burst can provide the off-field Hydro application during Yaoyao's on-field time, but Neuvillette's damage is so high that it's hard to not mention him despite his lack of off-field Hydro for Yaoyao while she runs around with her burst. Based on whether your Hydro character has that on-field or off-field capability, you'll want to make sure that your Hyperbloom trigger is the opposite. For example, Ayato, Barbara, Neuvillette, or Child are strictly on-field options, meaning you'll want to select Kuki Shinobu or Raiden Shogun for their off-field Hyperbloom triggers. On the other hand, Sino and Sucrose are great on-field options to pair with Xingqiu, Yilan, and Furina, who are strictly off-field characters. For the last slot, you have a lot of options since you can slot in a second Dendro character among the likes of Nahida or Dendro MC for more focus on bloom creation, or you can pick an Electro character like Fischl, Beto, or Yai Miko for more focus on Quicken and Aggravate. Yaoyao's Dendro application is fairly slow without her burst, so even Crow characters in the last slot can help create more Dendro cores by reacting with Hydro for freeze and allowing the Dendro element to remain on enemies instead of Hydro. Rosaria and Kaya will be your best options for this duty. Burgeon follows pretty much the exact same philosophy as Hyperbloom. The only issue is that Burgeon teams are a little bit more restrictive in who you can use because the burning reaction can be quite a nuisance to deal with. The same core exists with Yaoyao as your Dendro applicator, the wide array of Hydro applicators mentioned in the Hyperbloom section, and then either Toma as your off-field Burgeon trigger or Yanfei as your on-field Burgeon trigger. Yanfei specifically is a great catalyst option for Burgeon because her charge attack has a fairly short animation timing and she also gets a ton of stamina refund with her burst active. However, applying too much pyro with a character like Yanfei is a problem because burning eats up your Dendro application, so the final slot is meant to alleviate that problem. The characters most recommended for the final slot are Rosaria, Kaya, Fischl, Dendro MC, or Nahida. Most of these I've explained in the previous section or are pretty self-explanatory, but Fischl in particular is great for Burgeon due to her high energy generation with her skill and her ability to eat up pyro application with overload reactions. Nahida should only be used with C6 Xingqiu, C2 Yulan, or Child because the way her skill works makes for a disaster with burning unless you have extremely fast hydro application from these characters. To cover the last of the Bloom teams, Nilou Bloom is not only Yaoyao's best pairing but also my favorite pairing. Not only does the usefulness of Yaoyao's healing and Dendro application get amplified by the way Nilou's kit works, but she also enables a unique team with Candace. That unique team has Yaoyao, Nilou, Candace, and a second Dendro character which is usually Dendro MC or Nahida for their long uptime Dendro application. The premise is that this team swaps a ton to utilize Candace's burst, and then for the 5 seconds of Yaoyao's on-field time with her burst, Candace enables more Hydro application with Hydro Infusion. So if you use Dendro MC in the final slot for example, you can start your rotation with Nilou and then place down Yaoyao's skill. Afterwards, you'll swap to Candace and use her burst to allow Dendro MC to get a couple of Hydro normal attacks while they use their skill and burst, and then when you switch to Yaoyao, she'll also get Hydro normal attacks when her skill is about to expire and you're switching her in to use her burst. And if this sort of team doesn't pique your interest, then a standard Nilou Bloom team with a different Hydro character instead of Candace, like Xingqiu, Yulan, Ayato, Kokomi, Child, Neuvillette, Farina, or Barbara also work for that more standardized rotation as opposed to a quick swap rotation. And last but not least, we have Quicken teams for raw Dendro damage or raw Electro damage. Like all of the other teams, this archetype has a trio that serves as the core of the team regardless of what type of DPS you have. That trio is Yaoyao, your off-field Electro applicator for Quicken, and then your Dendro or Electro DPS in the third slot. Off-field Electro options include Fischl, Yae Miko, or Beidou for the best damage output, and then either Kujo, Sara, or Lisa for pure buffing options if your on-field DPS character is Electro, which in most cases will be Raiden Shogun or Keqing. On the flip side, Dendro DPS characters that can replace Raiden or Keqing include Tainari, Alhaitham, and Nahida, and more often than not you should avoid using Lisa or Kujo Sara with these characters. The final slot will depend on whether you have double Dendro characters or double Electro characters in your core. If you're double Electro, then either Kazuha or Sucrose as your Animo buffer with the 4-set Viridescent Veneer is most suitable for your team, but healer options like Shen Yun, Jin, and Sayu also work in this slot. If you're double Dendro, you cannot swirl Dendro and will have a tough time swirling Electro with so much Dendro application, so it's recommended to run either Zhongli for the shields, or simply add another off-field Electro DPS between Fischl, Yae, and Beidou for more damage and the Electro resonance. And with that, that's all I have time for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this updated Yaoyao guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Yaoyao for your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.